I'm sure you're having better weather there in California, for those of you in California, than we are here. Today was our first not sub-zero day in a week. We've had wind chills getting pretty cold. Like Ari mentioned, I have a couple of dogs at home, and this is the first day in a few days they're actually willing to go outside, as opposed to we had to bribe them to go outside before this. Enjoy whatever weather you've got, enjoy it, because I'm sure it's better than the weather we have here. So, like Ari said, today we are going to in a way, today we're going to take a step forward from Irving Berlin and the Gershwins to talk about Aaron Copland. Aaron Copland was a little bit younger. He is a step further on the path towards Jews becoming more Americanized, more assimilated, less connected to their traditional Jewish roots. I think that's the trajectory so far, where we started in the firmly Jewish world of Yiddish theater, and then we looked at the Gershwins and Irving Berlin as kind of transitional figures out, and Aaron Copland is the next step along in this transition, and we'll continue to follow this trajectory all the way pretty much through the end, the ebb and flow of Jewishness, of this balance between Jewishness and Americanness. Now, in um, Aaron Copland, like Irving Berlin and the Gershwins, he grew up in a similar kind of milieu, although a little bit later. I should say at the outset, I guess I should be completely transparent. I've always had a love of Aaron Copland's music. When I was in graduate school, when I was writing my doctoral thesis, which basically meant staying up every night for hours, just writing every night, trying to get it done. I had 4 or 5 pieces of pieces of classical music that I would listen to on a loop, because I didn't want to have any words, because the words would be distracting. And one of the pieces of music was Copland's Lincoln Portrait, which, although, as we'll see, has some of it has narrative, most of it is just beautiful music, beautiful, soothing music. So Copeland is not only one of the premier 20th century American composers of music, some consider him to be the first truly American composer of classical music, as opposed to Irving Berlin and the Gershwins, who wrote more pop music and music for shows and music for performances. Aaron Copland was a classical composer, and he's often regarded as the first, or one of the first, who wasn't simply an American composer transplanting European music to America, but writing music in a distinctly American style. Now that really describes the second half of his career as a composer. For the first half, he really was part of this generation of classical composers, Jewish and otherwise, who were trying to transplant the European classical tradition to America. Copeland, he was born into a Jewish family. His parents were immigrants from Eastern Europe. His father was Lithuanian. His mother came from Belarusia. I'm sorry, he came from Posen, which is the western part of Poland, but the western part of Eastern Europe. His parents met in the United States. They were a middle-class Jewish family. In other words, they didn't come from the poor, lower-income origins of the Lower East Side. They had some money, and what they were really trying to do is, in America, as Americans raising their children, they wanted their children to become as American as possible, which meant not only going to public school, which meant not only being part of American culture, but it meant learning to play musical instruments. They were part of that generation of parents for whom being middle-class American meant that you had the means and you had the commitment that your children should learn how to play a musical instrument, whether it was the piano or the violin or the trumpet or whatever. I don't know about you. I also grew up in a family like that. My mom, who was very musical, she wanted us all to have a musical instrument. Growing up, mine was the clarinet, which turned out to be kind of a disaster. And then later I learned how to play the guitar. My sister played the piano, my brother the violin, my other brother the trumpet. But that's the family that Copeland grew up in. Now, what's interesting is he was the youngest of 5 children, and all of his 4 older siblings, they all had piano lessons. But by the time they got to Copeland, his parents were a little bit reluctant to keep investing more and more money in piano lessons because his father in particular, he wasn't seeing the practical benefits of music lessons. So, you know, sometimes parents aren't as committed with the youngest child as they are with the oldest child. So ironically, with their youngest, Aaron, uh, they weren't going to give him piano lessons. He was going to be the one who didn't. And it turned out the one he used to sit and listen to his older sister Lauren Lauren play the piano, and he became fascinated. And she's the one who really taught him how to play the piano at a very young age. And he also demonstrated a real keen ability and a gift as not only in playing music, but also in writing music. He had a real gifted ear. And by the time he was a teenager, his parents had come to recognize that he had some really musical gifts, and they were more willing to begin to invest in it. As a young man, he found his first real music mentor. I mean, after his sister taught him to play the piano, his first real music mentor was a musician whose name was Reuben Goldmark. Now, Goldmark in the New York area, he was known as the music teacher, both as a piano teacher, as a teacher of music theory, as a teacher of composition. He taught from time to time at different institutions, but he was also hired as a private tutor for young people who were regarded as having real possibility, potential, promise, who were seen as being gifted. So for example, in addition to being Aaron Copland's music teacher, he was also George Gershwin's music teacher. He'd find young people who had a real knack and who would begin to teach them. Now, Goldmark's musical world was a very traditional European musical world. So from Goldmark, Copeland learned that solid foundation of classical music: Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, tonality, counterpoint, all the rules of harmony and chromaticism, all of that. He was deeply immersed in it. And there was a point in his life where he simply would write music like that. But one summer, he convinced his parents, as a late teen, he convinced his parents to let him go to summer school at a program in France at the Fontainebleau Castle. This was a summer school program for young Americans who had demonstrated promise in music. And that when he joined this program, this was the life-altering experience for him, because it wasn't just that he met other young gifted musicians. I mean, one of the people who was there was Igor Stravinsky. It wasn't just that he met all these people. He came into contact with a circle of musicians and composers who were all thinking, they all wanted to break out of this traditional classical music mold. In other words, they felt constrained by the traditional musical upbringings they had received. That's Doug #1 barking in the background, if you can hear him. They all wanted to break out of it, and they all wanted to try to do new things in terms of the music they were writing. Now, this was very much in tune with the time, because remember, Copeland, who was born in 1900, we're talking about the year 1920, at the beginning of that decade known as, in America, the Roaring Twenties. Now, one of the reasons the Roaring Twenties was called the Roaring Twenties, it wasn't just all the wild parties, but the Roaring Twenties described this vibrant explosion in culture across the board in so many ways. So in music, in art, in literature, in poetry, things just began. You had these cultural figures experimenting and trying new ways to tell stories or write poetry or write music or paint or whatever they were doing. It was just a period of intense cultural experiment and explosion. It also was a period of great change, not only in terms of culture, but let's say in terms of technology. Remember, the Roaring Twenties is a time when people discover things like the motor car, the airplane, the radio, motion pictures. I mean, these are all new things that were just overwhelming to people, and they were all happening at once. And on top of all of that, the Roaring Twenties is the time when women really began to assert their autonomy. For example, that this is the first time really in America where, in, at least in parts of America, it was okay, it was acceptable for a woman to go out in public without an escort, simply to be on her own. This is when the idea of the independent woman is really beginning to come to fruition. It's not seen as much a radical idea anymore. What I'm emphasizing, this is a time of great, great change. Now, with great change, there also comes a backlash to change. So there is a tension in American society and American culture between those who are riding the vibrant cultural wave of the Roaring '20s and those who are beginning to think twice about it and to push back against it. So one of the other changes is the 1920s is a time where you have seen a lot of rising xenophobia in America. This is also the age when the U.S. Congress basically curtails Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe. There's a fear of foreigners. There's a fear of communism. There's a fear of change from one segment, and there's a celebration of change from another. And it's causing this great tension, all of which is magnifying this excitement. Now that is the atmosphere in which Copeland is coming of age in America. Something similar is happening in Europe as well. So when he goes to the summer school program in France, he's encountering other young American scholars, musicians, who are also, they're swept up in this wave, in this surge of excitement, and they begin to write new kinds of music. Now, it's while he's in Paris, he really finds his new musical mentor. Remember, Goldmark had been a more traditional music teacher. In Paris, he and many of the other young musicians who are studying there with him, they come under the tutelage of a music teacher and composer whose name was Nadia Boulanger. Now, Nadia Boulanger, I mean, she was the one. If you wanted to have a serious career as a composer in the world of classical music or in jazz music or other kinds of music, you had to go spend some time with Nadia Boulanger. You were nobody if you weren't a pupil of Nadia Boulanger. If you didn't have her as a mentor, it was a glaring gap on your resume. And if you did have her as a mentor, if you did have Nadia Boulanger as someone who would speak to you, speak for you, speak on your behalf, well, you were really going places. And he became not only one of her students, but he became one of her favorite students. And so in Copeland, we see the interweaving of an older music tradition with a newer, avant-garde, experimental, forward-looking musical tradition. And that's why in his own musical career, you know, it divides into two periods. There's an earlier period until 1936, which is called his austere period. Now, austere is a little bit misleading here because we usually think of austere as being very rigid, stringent, and old-fashioned. Here, it's actually the opposite. In his austere period, this is where he's rigidly clinging to the aims of this avant-garde musical world, especially that emanating from Europe. And then after 1936, we call it his vernacular period. There, he's going to really branch off and do more specifically American music. So it's during this earlier period of music where we find the most obvious and the most prominent Jewish influence in Copeland's music. Because remember, you have all these different musicians who are coming from all different kinds of backgrounds, all different ethnicities, all different worlds. And one thing they're all trying to do is to weave their own folk heritage, into their classical music, especially because, you know, European classical music was very tightly defined as to what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And Copeland is someone who wanted to try to bring Jewish sounds into it in the same way that Irving Berlin and George Gershwin had brought musical sounds into popular music in America. Copeland, in a way, was doing the same thing with Jewish music. But here we have to be very careful because when it came to Jewish background, I mean, the Copelands, they simply weren't very Jewish. You know, the name Copeland, I know it doesn't sound very Jewish. The name Copeland was originally Kaplan. And, you know, en route from Eastern Europe to America, his father's family stopped in Scotland, and that's where Kaplan became Copeland. And when they came to America, Copeland was, you know, American sounding enough that they kept the name. But in many ways, that was a measure of his overall well, limited Jewishness, let's say. Sure, he had been to a synagogue. He liked to go. He did like to go to the Yiddish theater. In fact, the aspects of Jewish culture that appealed to Copeland the most were those aspects of Jewish culture that were less religious and more, well, cultural. So he never became a Zionist, but he was intrigued by the Zionist idea of secular Jewish culture. He flirted with being a Jewish socialist. You know, it's not, he was always a little ambivalent as to how much he got into that world. Some say more, some say less, but he liked the idea of secular Yiddish culture, even though Yiddish wasn't very much part of his life. He liked the idea that you could have a connection to your Jewish heritage apart from religion, because it wasn't just Judaism that wasn't part of his life. He had no interest in any religion at all. The closest he had an interest into religion is what was often known as the civic religion of America. You know, American values, not religious values like rights, like charity, like kindness, which was the civic religion of America. But there are instances early on in his music where he did try to, well, he incorporated aspects of Jewish culture which appealed to him. And oftentimes these were moments, or these were culture, Jewish cultural things that reminded him of himself. I'll give you a couple of examples as we go along. The first is, uh, about 800, 900 years ago, there was a Spanish Jewish poet named Yehuda Halevi. Yehuda Halevi is known as one of the great medieval Hebrew poets ever. And he lived in Spain during the waning days of the golden age of Spain. Toward the end of his life, he left Spain and went to the land of Israel. But while he was in Spain, one of his most famous poems is called Libi Bamizrach. My heart is in the East. In other words, I live in Spain. My heart is in the East. Let me read it to you, and then we'll read an adaptation. We can talk about why Copeland was interested in that particular poem. So the poem went like this: My heart is in the East, I in the outermost West. How can I find savor in food? How shall it be sweet to me? How shall I render my vows and my bounds while yet Zion lies beneath the fetters of Edom, which is the old rabbinic metaphor for Rome or Christendom, and I in Arab chains, in other words, living in the waning days of Muslim Spain. A light would it seem to me to leave all the good things of Spain, seeing how precious in mine eyes to behold the dust of the desolate sanctuary. In other words, Halevi, on the most literal level, was yearning for Zion while he lived in Spain. But more broadly, and the way Copeland really read this poem, and where he saw himself, is he saw himself, between two worlds. It wasn't so much part of the Jewish world, although he was Jewish and he knew he was Jewish and he was proud to be Jewish, but he wasn't very Jewish. But he didn't feel yet himself fully accepted as American. So in the same way Halevi sees himself pulled between two worlds, Copeland also saw himself pulled between two worlds. Now in 1918, when Copeland was 18, a friend of his, a poet named Aaron Schaffer, he created a modern adaptation, or I would call it a translation adaptation of Halevi's Hebrew poem. So this is Schaffer's slightly different version. While I in Western lands do pine, my heart is in the East. How can I taste of food and wine when thou art sore oppressed? How can I vows and oaths repay while Edom Zion holds, while Arab's bond my land doth sway? His chain me tight enfolds. The abundance of the Spanish land it is but not to me, if I midst brimming tears thy ruined strand could see. Like Copeland, he's expressing the sense of being torn. Now, it's not like Halevi being torn, like they're not talking about being torn between America and Israel. They're talking about being torn between two worlds, Jewish and American. One of Copeland's earliest pieces is he set Adam Scheffer's translation of My Heart is in the East to music. So let's listen to a recent recording of Copeland's musical setting of Adam Scheffer's My Heart is in the East. Now that theme of torn between two worlds, or floating between two worlds, that really was an important part of Copeland's early development. I'll give you another example of it as well. Copeland wasn't very Jewish per se, but he did have an interest. He did love the Yiddish theater. He wasn't a Yiddish speaker, but he loved to go to Yiddish theater. And it turns out one of his favorite Yiddish plays, which really was was a very popular play in Yiddish theater, was a Yiddish performance of a play called the Dybbuk by a Yiddish writer Ansky. Now, the Dybbuk is a Hebrew and Yiddish word for spirit or ghost. And basically, the Dybbuk is about a spirit, a ghost that's trapped between this world and the next. And so in the same way that this Dybbuk is trapped between this world and the next, Copeland felt himself trapped between these two worlds. It was a theme that really engaged him. Now, the Dybbuk was, as in Yiddish theater, the Dybbuk was a musical, and Copeland went to see it a number of times. And the tune from the play that really caught his eye, not only in terms of the melody that he loved, but also thematically, is a song that's called Mipnei Ma, which in Hebrew means for what reason? Why? And this is a moment when the Dybbuk is asking himself why he's trapped in this situation. So I want to illustrate how Copeland would borrow this melody from Yiddish theater and put it in one of his pieces. So let's listen to a little bit of this song Mipnei Ma. Here's a performance that was done by the cantor of the Central Synagogue in New York about 10 years ago, I think. So let's listen to a little bit of that, and then I'll point out what that tune is.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, can't wait to hear it.
Or you can stop it there. It's a great tune. Now you have to picture when this was performed in the Yiddish theater, the whole audience was singing and clapping along. This was like the song that everybody knows, that everyone is so excited about. Everyone would be pulsating. And so Copeland is sitting in, not only does he like the tune, but the audience is pulsating along. It's a tune that really stayed with him, especially, Mipnei Ma, Mipnei Ma. Da, 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 da. So when he finally wrote his breakthrough musical piece, was known as the Vitebsk Trio, a classical piece for three instruments. And one of the main musical motifs of this song is that very tune from Mipnei Ma, from Ansky's Dybbuk. So we're going to listen to it. Now, as you listen to it, Copeland is being experimental. He's not just going to take the tune and put it in. It's going to be a little bit more subtle, but he's going to put it in one instrument and then another instrument. It's going to be underneath. So let's listen to a little bit of the Vitebsk Trio. We're going to pick it up at 1:45. Let's listen to it and see if you can hear how he's weaving that Mipnei Ma tune in. Let's take a listen. Hello. Right there underneath on the piano. You can stop it there. All right. So first of all, I guess I should say that for those of you who are used to Copeland from Fanfare for the Common Man and Rodeo and Billy the Kid, music that's easier to listen to, and maybe you're wondering, yes, I hear the melody, but why would anyone possibly spend time listening to this cacophonous stuff? Yes, this music is more challenging. That was the point of this music of the 1920s, to try to press the edge of chromaticism, not only in a musical way, but it's to build tension. And remember, the whole reason he loved the play, the Dybbuk, was that tension between two worlds. What he's expressing here is his own feeling of tension, trying to live between two worlds and to be part of both worlds at the same time. That's a common technique where you take a musical motif and you build around it. I would also say that I know what you mean. You have to listen to the Vitebsk trio. I'm going to say a minimum 5 times before you really start to hear the aesthetic beauty in this music. I remember my first time hearing it. It was very difficult. I was listening to it for a class. It was very difficult to listen to it a second time. But you got it's like acquiring a taste for coffee or beer or whatever. You got to push it if you want to, or you don't have to. But it tells us that in this early Copeland, he is taking Jewish themes and he's incorporating it in. That's in his early period, though. By the time we get to the 1930s, Copeland is changing. There's a change in his music that's detectable, I would say, both musically and Jewishly. Because by the time we get to the 1930s, Copeland is really no longer interested in trying to weave any kind of Jewish themes in. And musically, he's breaking with this school of this harsh tonality, this music that's supposed to challenge you, to make it difficult to find the beauty of it. His vernacular period of music, this is when he's trying to replace that complexity and hard chromatic music that really that he learned from Nadia Boulanger and even from Goldmark, that older music. And then in the 1930s, he really wanted to write music that was simply pleasing and beautiful, musically genius and well crafted, but music that was simpler and that wasn't as difficult to penetrate and to really appreciate. And he wanted a broader audience of musical listeners to be able to understand. Now, I would say also this wasn't only an odyssey he was making musically. This is also a period, this is the middle of the Great Depression, where Copeland, like other composers, like other cultural figures, they were very much aware that that these were challenging years for Americans all across the country. First, you have those tumultuous changes of the 1920s, followed by the economic hardship of the 1930s. And he came to the realization that what Americans need more than anything else, especially in the specter of Hitler and fascism and all of the craziness in the world, they need music which is uplifting, but also music which is simpler, music which addresses the simple values and the simple beauties of life in America. And he wrote two pieces in two very different contexts about two different things that are each going to express this emphasis on simplicity. The first was something he wrote, a piece he wrote called Quiet City. Let me read you his description of what Quiet City is supposed to be. And by the way, the second is going to be Fanfare for the Common Man, so we're going to get to that. So this is in one of the first performances of Quiet City by the Boston Symphony Orchestra. This is what the concert bulletin said, quote, it was based on, well, first of all, it was based on a play by Irwin Shaw called Quiet City. And the play described the purpose of the play was to show what city life was like after hours, when everyone was asleep, when all the stores were closed, when there wasn't so much traffic, and the city at night was quiet. Even a big city at night could be quiet. Well, maybe not LA and maybe not New York, but cities can be more peaceful and serene at night. So he said, quote, in the spring of 1939, I was asked by my friend Harold Clurman, director of the group theater, to supply the incidental musical score for a new play by Irwin Shaw entitled Quiet City, which was a realistic fantasy concerning the night thoughts of many kinds of different people in a great city. It called for music evocative of the nostalgia and inner distress of a society profoundly aware of its own security. In other words, living in the city was so overwhelming and could be so confusing and perplexing with all the problems in the world. But at night, if you walked the quiet streets, maybe it would settle down a little bit. So let's listen to a little bit of Quiet City, and then we'll listen to a little bit of Fanfare for the Common Man. Okay, let's listen to a little Quiet City.
So I have teed up Copeland Clarinet Concerto.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I skipped that one by mistake. Yeah, we'll do that one first, and then we'll do Quiet City. Thanks, Ari. The Clarinet Concerto, I just wanted to play just to make a different point. We're just going to listen to a minute or two of this. The Clarinet Concerto is a piece written by Copeland, and he wrote it with a very particular clarinetist in mind, Benny Goodman, who in many ways, what Benny Goodman was to the clarinet, Copeland was to composing classical music. And the only reason I wanted to play you an excerpt of the Clarinet Concerto was just to give you a snippet of this remarkable musical moment where you have probably the greatest American composer conducting a piece that he wrote for the greatest American clarinet player. And it so happens that the greatest of this and the greatest of this were two Jewish boys who grew up in a similar neighborhood and who really became fixtures in this musical scene. So let's listen to a little bit of the Clarinet Concerto. That's enough. Nice little taste there. I know it's worth listening to that whole thing. It's such a beautiful piece of music. I would also point out that for Copeland, this is kind of a transition. You hear how different that is from the Vitebsk trio, which is so, so chromatic, so much tension in the music. Here he's moving towards that more simple music, and Benny Goodman is doing it with him. Incidentally, personal story, when I was a student in the 1980s in Ann Arbor, I heard Benny Goodman's last concert before he died. He must have been 90 years old and could still play that clarinet the way he played it in this video right over here. Okay, so now let's listen to Quiet City and this way of Copeland to reassure his musical listeners, to basically instill a sense of hope and a relief, escape from the cacophony of modern life. Let's listen to a little bit of Quiet City. We can stop there. I know it's hard to interrupt that one. I love that piece of music. And remember, that was written as background, as stage music for a performance of a play. And you can hear even more the simplicity of it. There's a more emphasis on the majestic simplicity of horns as opposed to the evocativeness of strings. But that's the direction he's going to. And see, in a sense, by this point in his career, it's hard for us to say that there's something specifically Jewish about it. But I would say it this way, though. You see, there's two ways to see the relationship between Jews and American music. There's Jews actually bringing Jewish themes in, but there are also Jews participating in the broader world of American musical culture. And that's really what this is, because American Jews were experiencing this moment, the perplexities, the confusion, the cacophony, all the changes. They were experiencing it along with everyone else, with the one exception that American Jews were also still in the process of adapting to America. So that challenge was there. Copeland, he's insofar as he's being very American, that was a signature feature of that generation of Jews, these second generation Jews who grew up American and simply wanted to be. And here's Copeland really expressing, well, the Americanness of his musical soul that he has discovered. Now, Quiet City was written with respect to the simplicity and calm of the city at night. Fanfare for the Common Man, which really is one of his, it's a magnum opus of Copeland. I think it's probably his most well-known piece of music. Maybe, well, for music aficionados, maybe it's Billy the Kid or Rodeo, but Fanfare for the Common Man is probably his most well-known. And here he's not just speaking about the city, he's speaking about America in general. He wants to express that simple, salt of the earth, common, basic feeling of what it is to live in America, to step beyond the difficulties, the challenges, to the changes, to get down to this grassroots level of this, of the, well, really of the American soul, of that, what, of the American ethos, I guess we might call it. And that's what Fanfare for the Common Man is trying to do. It's building on Quiet City, and it's moving, I think, even more in a direction of simple beauty, as opposed to the complex beauty of the Vitebsk trio that you have to acquire. Fanfare for the Common Man, like I think Quiet City, you can hear one time and recognize it as a beautiful piece of music. And I think that was his intention. So let's listen to some Fanfare for the Common Man. Can't have a lecture about Copeland without listening to some fanfare. I know. I'll tell you what was amazing about that piece of music, first of all, is that it's pretty much horns. And typically, music that was dominated by horns either was going to be some form of jazz music, it was more improvisational, and we'll see more of that next week, or it was going to be marching band music, marches. But Copeland says, no, I'm going to use mainly horns and that kettle drum, and I'm going to write a beautiful piece of classical music, just using that and using simple themes. In some ways, he takes the simplicity of a piece of music like taps, and he says, I'm going to turn that into something. And musically, this is easy listening. This is going to be inspirational and accessible to anyone really the first time. Now, this goal of trying to write this music that's really capturing the American spirit, it reaches a culmination, I think. So I could have played examples from Billy the Kid or Rodeo. Those are great pieces of music. But I gotta play the Lincoln Portrait because it's my favorite. Now, the Lincoln Portrait, first of all, it's going to do two things where he really brings this simplicity and Americanness to its climax. First of all, he is going to use tunes from American folk tunes. He's going to use tunes from American songs, and he's going to introduce narration, spoken words, where he's going to have a narrator speak words of Abraham Lincoln, who of course is the quintessential, American expositor of American ideas. The piece was written in the 1942, where really this was a very difficult time. I should say that, when you listen to different versions, there are different versions with different narrators. My favorite version, my favorite narrator, I could not find a recording. My favorite version is narrated by Adlai Stevenson. It's magnificent, but you can find it narrated by many, many people. The James Earl Jones version is very good. The version we're going to listen to also is very, very good. All different people have narrated this, but we're not going to start at the beginning. We're going to cut to the part where the spoken words are begin. And I want you to notice that it's not an abrupt transition from the music to the spoken words. Copeland managed to fit music and words together seamlessly. So let's listen to a little bit of the Lincoln Portrait. We're going to start at about the 145 mark. This is a Stephen Foster tune called Old Folks at Home. Those campaigns. Ari, let's pause here. Why don't you skip to the 620 mark so we can hear some narration? There. Let's pause there. All right. So the narration's a little bit further on. I urge you to listen to the narration from the quotes from Lincoln, but the simplicity of the quotes from Lincoln are going to blend in very, very seamlessly with the music. I mean, you got to admit that is just a great piece of music, and the narration makes it even more dramatic. Now, one of the people who was really very much influenced by Aaron Copland is going to be Leonard Bernstein, because one of the things that Leonard Bernstein is going to do in his remarkable collection of music is he's going to use the technique of having narration as part of a symphony, except Bernstein being a generation later at a time where there's a bit more of a Jewish revival. He's going to use narration in a symphony that he writes called the Kaddish Symphony, where his narration is going to be a Jewish son speaking to his late Jewish father. But he's going to use this Copeland technique of weaving in the spoken words as a way of enhancing the music. So we can see this trajectory of Copeland's music from this earlier, more complex music, where he's straddling the world of Jewish music and the world of American music. By the end, he's much more fully immersed. And I think that's really what really comes down to who he was in the music that he wrote. So I'll make one last comment, is throughout all of this, Copeland is still an example of a Jewish composer who's synthesizing different styles of music together. Now, next week, when we talk about Jews and jazz music, we're going to look more closely at the way this Jewish musical tradition is going to fuse with the African-American musical tradition of jazz, and see how ultimately these two traditions are not only going to be blendable, but they're going to be complementary and compatible. And what's going to come out of this blending is going to enhance both those traditions that we're going to see next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a few quick questions. I know we're at time here. Harris wants to know where you put Appalachian Spring in the mix of great Copeland.
Did I forget to mention that's a great piece of music too? I was gonna play a clip from Appalachian Spring, but I could not find a single part of Appalachian Spring where I could listen to less than 4 minutes. So for the sake of time, that's definitely up there. It's also a transitional piece of music from his earlier, more complex to his simplicity. I would say in some ways Appalachian Spring is, it's really it's approaching Fanfare for the common man, but there's still more vestiges of that earlier complexity. But that's also a remarkable piece of music.
Jay Resnick says, in case you're interested, Shaw's play Quiet City closed after 3 weeks. So there you go. The music lasted longer.
The music lasted forever. The play was gone in a few weeks, and that's why we don't know Copeland's music as music behind a play, because the play basically disappeared.
A question I think I asked last week, I'll ask again, which is, how does Copeland fit into the upper crust of the American population? Was his music more accepted faster than other music because it came from a different part of the musical genre as opposed to like street music and Yiddish music? Was he popular very quickly, or did it also take a while?
Because by this point, he's not that visibly Jewish anymore. Doesn't have a Jewish name. I mean, he looked Jewish, but he doesn't have a Jewish name. But also his training. He didn't come from street music like Irving Berlin. He didn't come from shows. He had this classical European training. He had the Reuben Goldmark, Nadia Boulanger pedigree. And so the music he wrote, the classical music he wrote, very quickly not only became part of the American pantheon of classical music, but he was given pride of place as being the first truly American composer who wasn't simply, transplanting European style, but writing a new, distinctly American style of music. So not only is he part of it, he becomes the centerpiece of it.
And do we know whether he was interacting with other Jewish musicians of his day? I don't know what his writings are, but was he kind of working in his own?
Bit.
Okay.
Well, no, he definitely with Leonard Bernstein. I mean, we'll see, especially when we talk about Jews with jazz and especially with Broadway. He wasn't directly part of it, but yes, it was his influence. He became a kind of mentor or a kind of sounding board for a whole generation of younger Jewish writers and composers who really saw him as the iconic way of writing American music.
Perfect. Stephanie Rothman says, how about his music used for ballet and modern dance, like Alvin Ailey? So I guess there's a lot more out there we can't get
Oh
to.
yeah, I saw Alvin
hour.
Ailey dance rodeo and Billy the Kid, so it's accessible to a whole broad range of people. I mean, people who are jazz aficionados will see influences of a little bit of influence of that in some of his music. He was blending all of these sounds together and really the first to do it in a uniquely and originally American way.
So as we've done with in all programs in this series and other programs, there'll be a follow-up email. I will share all the videos that you can watch and some of the videos you didn't get to see. Like I'll try to find Billy the Kid, Rodeo, Appalachian Spring. And so you can enjoy that. But for now, I think it's time to go. So thank you for the trip to Aaron Copland's life, through Aaron Copland's life and his music and his influence on American music. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Good to see you
Thank you,
all.
everybody. See you next
Have a great Shabbat weekend. Keep healthy, and a lot of CSP coming up. So thanks. Thanks for your support. Bye, everybody.